Hello out there, this is the Mugwump, and today I'm very happy. Why am I so happy? I'm so happy because Mr. John McIntosh, and I think I'm saying that right, put out a video on the Feminist Frequency channel discussing 5 ways men can help end sexism, and I think that's just great. I am so glad that this happened. I would have responded much faster, but I really don't know how to use YouTube, so it took me a while to figure out how to get this stuff together, but I think it makes some interesting points, and I'd like to make some interesting points on it. But before I can really talk about it, I just want to remind everybody of something that I'm sure no one's forgotten, but I don't think the context is terribly clear. A while ago, the Feminist Frequency channel, put out this statement, and I don't remember what video. It was so decried that it was actually easier for me to find a criticism video of it and nab it from there. That's how easy that was, as opposed to going through her actual stuff. And and it went a little something like this.
While it may be comforting to think that we all have a personal force field protecting us from outside influences, this is simply not the case. Scholars sometimes refer to this type of denial as the third person effect, which is the tendency for people to believe that they are personally immune to media's effects, even if others may be influenced or manipulated. Paradoxically, and somewhat ironically, those who most strongly believe that media is just harmless entertainment are also the ones most likely to uncritically internalize harmful media messages. In short, the more you think you cannot be affected, the more likely you are to be affected.
So, like I said, people were very upset by this when it came out, when it happened. It was all over the place. And I'm here to say that it's really not that crazy, and it's also not really that new an idea. It's certainly not unique to this person's disposition. So there's another philosopher that's out right now, and he's quite brilliant. His name is Slavoj Žižek, and he says something very similar in his piece, A Pervert's Guide to Ideology. And I'm just going to put it right here so you can see the two. At least this way you can see the two right next to each other, and you can see the similarities and the strange difference.
Am eating from the trash can all the time. The name of this trash can is ideology. The material force of ideology makes me not see what I'm effectively eating. It's not only our reality which enslaves us. The tragedy of our predicament when we are within ideology is that when we think that we escape it into our dreams, at that point we are within ideology.
So it's not a coincidence that these two people are saying basically the same thing. They are both um, part of a philosophical tradition called critical theory. And I basically subscribe to this same understanding that they're expressing in these two clips. But the reason why what Feminist Frequency says is so hard to listen to, and what Zizek says is such music to my ears, even though they seem to be saying basically the same thing, is basically it's twofold. There are two reasons. Reason number one is that where the Feminist Frequency channel says, oh, you guys are the ones doing it, and has this strange air of authority. Let me guide you. Let me show you. The Zizek clip says, we're in this. It takes responsibility for the same trouble. The other problem is that where um, Zizek says that this is something that ideology does, uh, the Feminist Frequency channel simply refers to a vague notion of the media. It's not strong enough to make the point, and it causes that strange reaction from everybody else to say, well, who are you to tell me that the media has this strong level of influence on me? Well, it's just simply not the media alone. It makes it far too simple. So this is why I'm just so happy about this list of 5 ways that men can help end sexism. Forgetting for a moment that this this title starts in a very literal place, giving you essentially a laundry list and ends in a metaphysical one. I always love sentences like that. Forgetting that for a moment, um, I think it's great because it's basically marching orders for for changing feminism as an element of philosophy into a political movement. These guys are interested in doing that. That's something that seems to be lost on everybody. Way too many people think that this whole thing is about video games, and it's not. So, like, I want to get started, and I want to just take a look at this, and I think it's actually really fun. I think it's fun. It's a fun video. Let's have fun.
For many men, it can be hard to know exactly what role we can or should play in working towards an end to sexism.
Before we go any further, I just want to make an acknowledgement. This is incredibly hard to do. I really do respect these people at this channel for what they're doing, because what they're putting together here is essentially a treatise. Nobody else is reading the media in this way, like the way that they're enacting criticism, reading it through their particular philosophical lens. It's very difficult, and to like get it together to like try to speak in YouTubeese with this weird list, like the kind of thing you might read on BuzzFeed, and then end in a philosophical position is very difficult. I do respect it. And I think it deserves some respect, because it's much easier to criticize than it is to make something like new like this. I'm not doing it. It's much easier for me to criticize it, so here I am. So just wanted to have that acknowledgement before anybody went any further.
How can men help, and how much or how little should we be helping? In this video, we will explore answers to those questions and share a few suggestions about how men can respectfully approach feminism and, critically, explain why it's beneficial for men to be involved.
It's worth it here to note what kind of a video this really is. This is propaganda, and I really mean that I mean that with no shame. I'm not trying to be one of those like shitty people who like go, oh, you're making some point, I don't like it, so all of a sudden it becomes propaganda. It's not propaganda for that reason. It's propaganda because it's the form of propaganda. It's not a propaganda movie, like a propaganda movie like Triumph of the Will or something, and you see like big shots of lots of people. No, that's not what this is. It's not a movie. This is more like the form of like radio propaganda, like the kind of thing that like Ezra Pound put out during the Second World War from Rome. It takes on that form. A lot of YouTube is like that. YouTube more does the radio thing. That's why YouTubers like me can like just talk in front of an image instead of having to do anything more than that. It's basically radio, and this is basically radio propaganda.
The Jew is both the cause and the beneficiary of our slavery.
If we ignore our destiny, he will triumph over us and our future. The Jew thrives in filth and garbage. He spreads disease. He steals our possessions and lusts after our women.
Yeah, okay. So I don't really think he's a Nazi. That's in bad taste. But even here, even in this is not a real recording of a Nazi. This is Nick Nolte from the movie Mother Night, based on the book by Kurt Vonnegut. It's fantasy, but he is striking the appropriate chord. Like even here, you can hear him talking about the dialectic. The Jew is the cause and the beneficiary, etc., etc. That's what you get also in any element of critical theory. If you're doing critical theory, you're going to end up in a dialectic in a peculiar way. We're all Hegel's children.
First things first. Because there's so much misinformation about feminism floating around out there in the cultural ether, it's useful to quickly define what that term actually means. Feminism is a socio-political movement with the central goal of ending sexism and dismantling gender-based oppression.
This is a wonderful example of what propaganda can do as opposed to other forms of persuasive media, say like a polemic or like a narrative with a point or something like that. This definition is in no way the definition of feminism. That's just not what it is. Feminism is part of philosophy. That's why most people involved would not mind calling themselves a feminist, because it didn't overshadow everything else they were doing. It was just a notion that, okay, along with everything else I'm doing, I'm making sure that gender equality is a part of it, no matter what. And I think that is important. There's no reason for gender inequality in any sort of progressive philosophical discipline. There's just no reason for it. But here, we can see that he's taking a definition, and I've heard that this is from a book, but I'm not sure. He doesn't cite it. It just says that it's a noun under the picture. and sort of doing that trick where it retroactively makes all the things that came before it under its own guise. But it is a trick. It's not real. Like if you were to say, "Oh, I believe in democracy," and then someone from the Democratic Party goes, "Oh no, you're a Democrat," then it's like, no, you're not necessarily a Democrat just because you believe in democracy. You're not necessarily a Republican just because you believe in republicanism. That's why Democrats and Republicans have to spell their name with capital R, capital D, and even when someone's describing it, they might say, well, that's why I'm a Democrat, lowercase d, meaning the concept, not the party. This is like a statement of a party, and that's where this real strength comes in. I'm going ahead. These are marching orders. This is what marching orders sound like, and this is very interesting, but it's also a point worth making.
So contrary to common misconceptions, feminism is not about man-hating or female supremacy. It's important to note that the feminist endeavor, as it's been defined by women like Bell Hooks, does not simply seek equal access for women within current systems of power, but instead seeks to transform those systems and the values associated.
If you've ever been inside a government building or a bureaucratic institution run by the state, you'll see on the wall somewhere, usually in the office of somebody with some kind of power, a picture of the president hanging on the wall. This is not like an aesthetic choice. It's also not a personal choice. This is a direct implication that I speak on behalf of this authority, and that's what's going on with this picture of Bell Hooks behind him. He hasn't even said her name yet, but still the picture is hanging behind him, as though to say, well, yes, I am this person who's talking, but I speak to you with the full force of this authority figure.
With them. So where do men fit into all of this? Well, women have long been pointing out the ways in which men can benefit from feminism, and actively calling for men's participation in working towards ending sexism. As Bell Hooks writes in her landmark 1984 book, Feminist Theory.
And boom goes the dynamite. Now comes the piece. Now he's prepped it by showing the figure sitting behind him, and now we're going to get some clarification as to the nature of the authority that he's invoking. But the thing here is he's talking about two elements leading up to it. One, about how women are saying, oh, men, you need to help us in this feminist endeavor. We're all alone, which is absolutely not true. But it has a truth to it. That's like the sneaky part about it. And the other thing that he's doing is he's providing us with a piece to read, like something like what you might say, oh, well, America is a country, but it's not just like a mythological thing. We have a constitution. The constitution is a literal document that supports all of the different elements of the country. Well, he's basically giving you a constitutional point here, and so there are two elements to talk about. One is the idea of male allies, and the problem is that it's not that people can't be allies in any given idea. Um, in the old days of fascism and communism, when you had people who weren't exactly part of like whatever political party you had joined, but still shared like the same ideas, you would call those kinds of people fellow travelers. That's actually how the CIA would have put it. They would have been like, well, like this socialist and many other socialist fellow travelers. That's what they mean by allies. But the way they're using it is less like an ally and more like a vassal. And if we're going and looking at the dialectic, that's a great big step backwards into feudalism. And you don't really want that. The other problem is there's a difference between initiation and indoctrination. When you initiate somebody into an idea, you say, okay, I want you to be a part of you. I want you to understand it on a basic level. You bring your ideas to the table. You try to communicate the different principles. And then you say, look, you can read these other things. You reference your points. You cite yourself. Whereas this is indoctrination. You have no choice. You want to sign up? Okay, buddy, then here's your constitution. This is what you have to read. Get the doctrine straight and then come back to me. And I think that's why he says, like, educate yourself later on. It's the same idea.
From margin to center. Like women, men have been socialized to passively accept sexist ideology. While they need not blame themselves for accepting sexism, they must assume responsibility for eliminating it. Men are not exploited or oppressed by sexism, but there are ways in which they suffer as a result of it. That bears repeating.
The Jew is both the cause and the beneficiary of our slavery.
Sorry, I really don't think he's a Nazi.
Men are not exploited or oppressed by sexism, but there are ways in which we suffer as a result of it. We are taught early on that boys don't cry, that to show sensitivity or emotional vulnerability is...
I'm going to skip this like litany of examples. It's just basically him speaking as an authority as a man, so you can't contradict him, which is the same trick they use with "oh, believe my experience as a woman" thing, listing things that may or may not be true and may or may not be reasonable, and it would be a very long time to like sit around and to like try to figure out, oh, okay, this example means something, this one doesn't, this one's trying to do this. The important thing is that by putting you through this like list of examples, your mind does something immediately and starts to believe it. It's a weird element of like human psychology. Jargon makes people more accepting of things, and litanies make people more accepting of things. That's why everything from BuzzFeed to like to CNN has like endless lists, including this video, which is submitted to us as a list of 5 ways men can help end sexism, as though there was some list out there that's going to solve everybody's problems. Point is, it's actually listening to the list that has the effect of indoctrination. It's very important to the process.
So while men as a group are afforded gender-based privileges at the expense of women, a byproduct of patriarchy.
I'm pretty sure that's the first time we hear the word patriarchy in this video, and this is what I'm talking about, how it's slipped in very casually as an already accepted term. We went to all the trouble of defining a new kind of feminism, but there's no need to define a new kind of patriarchy. It's the mythical other that we can all just worry about all the time.
Is that it also causes real harm to men's well-being. Okay, so if we're on board with ending sexism, what specifically can we do as men to be helpful?
I really appreciate the way that this says tips. It doesn't say instructions, even though that's what they are. It's that euphemistic attitude. It's the aw shucks version of propaganda that we saw immediately with Michael Moore, and now it's trickled down into here. It's also in like something like Zeitgeist. It's like, oh, I'm just shrugging my shoulders, telling you some facts. They're not facts. This is all in the pursuit of reaching an ideological orthodoxy. Oh, here we go.
Here's our quick list of 5 tips for respectfully engaging with feminism as men.
So you see here how in one sentence the language becomes automatically exclusive. We went from we as men, we as this, we think this, we see this, to how we can respectfully engage with feminism. We can't touch it. It's not a part of us. It's not for us. We are excluded. So, okay, as excluded population, how do we go ahead and start interacting? And he's going to tell us because he knows. And he does know because he invented it.
Listen to women. Now that might seem really obvious, but far too often men have a hard time just listening to what women have to say and respecting women's knowledge and experiences. Because of the way we're socialized to think of our voices as most important, men have a tendency to interrupt and interject ourselves into conversations and then to dominate those interactions.
Okay, so this is a myth. It's just an outright myth. And there's a really good joke in that movie Goodfellas, and I think it is an old joke, but I definitely heard it in Goodfellas, where there's this old couple, and they're sitting around, and they're entertaining, and they're talking to each other, and the man is being just very quiet and kind of staring off in the distance, and the older woman is just talking, 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 and they're like, oh well, what does your husband have to say? And she goes, oh, he never really says anything. Why do you never say anything? She says to him, and he turns back and goes, what should I say? That my wife 2 times me all the time? And she goes, shut up, you're always talking. I think that pretty much sums it up. It's one of those instances where when the person, man or woman, is in the middle of doing something, they're going to be more sensitive to something that goes against the grain of how they're feeling. And essentially what these guys are doing here, in particular in this way, talking about, oh, men are raised to do it, and so they act this way, it's just sort of a way of weaponizing it. It's making it very effective to say, "Oh, well, you're only interrupting me because you're a man." When a woman interrupts, "Oh, that's a totally different thing. I'm taking back my power." Okay, this dynamic is foolish, and it doesn't even really play into the dialectic that they're trying to submit to us.
This behavior is so ingrained that men often don't even realize we're doing it, which is why it's critical to learn how to take a step back, to try not to interrupt, and instead actively listen and absorb what is being said before responding.
This is what I mean when I said that it doesn't even really play into the dialectic that they're presenting us. So, like, the history of dialectic kind of works like this. Hegel had his master-slave dialectic and his political dialectic. Marx had the class dialectic. And they're trying to present some sort of similar gender dialectic. even the way he's saying, "Oh, well, men don't even know that they're doing it, but you're gonna do it, and so you need to be aware of that," is like a Marxist idea. They don't know what they're doing, but they're nonetheless doing it. Very interesting that he would apply it here. I wonder if they even know that it derives from Marx, because I know that the stuff they're reading, although it's very derivative of these different philosophers, very often people stop at their first source point, which would explain why he's pushing all the particular readings he's pushing and not giving any background beyond that. But interestingly enough, what he's saying, the active listening thing, is also the first step in hostage negotiation. If I was trying to negotiate hostages from a madman, the first step is active listening before I can engage. So it is funny that even this person who's trying to come off as completely reasonable, if we scratch the surface, we see, yes, in fact he is, and they are holding people hostage, and we should treat them as such, and they know it. Isn't that funny?
Now, of course, this does not mean you have to agree with everything every individual woman says. No one person's perspective can ever represent all of feminism or the experiences of all women. It simply means that we, as men, are not in a position to define feminism for women.
Of course we are. Because it's not about defining something for anybody. The definition is an end in of itself. The point is that one can make a definition based on ideas, and the notion that somehow a biological input would ruin your ability to think is, to me, complete anathema. It's not at all what I'm used to in critical theory. This is a pretty common complaint among those who profess this philosophy, that white men need to be quiet or take a step back or something. And the question you need to ask yourself is like, well, why are so many white men trying to get involved in the conversation? And they're saying, oh, why? Yeah, why? It's silly, it's stupid, it doesn't have anything to do with them, they have their own thing. This is not true. This is a complete illusion. Um, the whole perspective is all wrong. It doesn't have anything to do with whiteness or maleness. What you need to understand is that, by and large, people don't even really know these conversations are taking place. Varying degrees, people know about some of the stuff that's being talked about, but by and large, the status quo does just truck on. The people that you're hearing from, their whiteness and their maleness is not really important. What you're seeing is that they're interested in emancipatory politics, and you are professing to hold the key to emancipatory politics. I don't think so. I think that this is the big failing here, is that your progressiveness doesn't have a progressive agenda. It has sort of a progressive dogma, and some of the dogma might be very important, but in general, it doesn't have a progressive agenda. And that's where the temptation to be like, okay, well, you need to be quiet, this kind of person needs to be quiet. Only the initiated can talk, and only the indoctrinated can listen. It's a really horrible dynamic to put forth. But the thing is that you need to remember is that it's a positive thing that all these people are trying to jump into the situation. These people are interested in the progress of society. That's why they're so attracted to it. And they hear you saying things that exclude them, and there's an immediate gut reaction. This is a positive thing. It's so strange to me that it's being cast as a negative one. But, okay, well, the truth is that this has gone on for a bit too long, in my opinion, so I'm going to do a part two. But I'm going to leave you with a Zizek. I started with a Zizek, I'm going to leave you with a Zizek, and I hope you like it, those of you who made it to the end.
This is why, if you are students or professors, don't feel guilty.
Pokud jste studenti nebo profesoři, nestyďte se za to, nepociťujte vinu.
False leftists or even rightists today are telling you, you have privileged life, don't you feel guilty? Children are starving in Africa while you are just studying here.
Tento pocit viny se ve vás dneska snaží probudit falešní levičáci i pravičáci argumentem, že vy máte takový pohodlný život, jen si hloubáte, a co děti v Africe, které hladovějí.
I think this is maybe even the predominant ideology today, this permanent humanitarian crisis.
Tohle je vlastně možná dominantní dnešní ideologie, tahle neustálá humanitární krize.
Because the message is a clear and simple one. The message is do something, help the poor, but don't think.
And that we should actively pay attention to women's voices, because for so long, women's experiences, women's perspectives, and women's ideas have been dismissed, ignored, and silenced.
This precisely is the ultimate illusion. Ideology is not simply imposed on ourselves. Ideology is our spontaneous relationship to our social world, how we perceive its meaning, and so on and so on. We, in a way, enjoy our ideology.
And you're the same kind of bad as me. Huh. You're the same kind of bad as me. She's the same kind of bad.